we would more likely have a ministerial notice of motion, which would be debatable by all parties.
Can you elaborate more on what that moral support could look like?
No, I think it was just a general sense of, a feeling of how New Zealand might respond and what our views of these things would be, and whether we, felt, whether we could support what they were doing if they, in the end, had to do it.
So just to clarify, would it take the debate to Parliament for moral support? Like the final decision would rest with Cabinet Minister?
I think that's a good way of discussing it, yeah. There'd be a ministerial statement, probably, at some point, assuming there's an action either unilaterally taken or by the United Nations, then there will certainly be a ministerial statement. But I think the ultimate decision about whether we do want to offer that moral support or not is probably something the executive would reserve the right to.
And there's no likelihood of any kind of military support at all from New Zealand?
There's certainly never been any indication. I can't see how it would be. If you think about the kind of broad outline that President Obama gave, I just read his statement over the weekend, he seemed to be talking about if there was action taken, that it would be narrowly focused, it would be no boots on the ground, it would be quite a specific action. And I think the US has the military might and capability to execute that kind of plan. New Zealand really doesn't have that.
Right, so will Pike and the families be relieved by the news that they had?
Well, whatever the outcome of that decision, yes, I think that they will be relieved that things are another step further on. But we're hastened to add, I think the situation's still very raw for some of those families and a very emotional time for them.
You obviously acted on it quite quickly. Does that show that there was consensus within Cabinet around the plan? Was there much discussion?
There's quite a lot of discussion, but there's certainly consensus, I think is what I would say.
Just on the asset sales referendum,
yep.
When will that be held and what form will it take?
Just taking some advice on that. Our view is it's utter waste of money. We've had a referendum, it was called a general election, and National won that election on the back of this major policy plank with an overwhelming majority, the biggest result we've received in MMP history. So it wasn't like this was something that wasn't fully debated. But look, in the end, we know that we have to have the referendum now by no later than I think the 3rd of September next year. So I'll get some advice one way in the Marshall Islands, then try and give you an indication of when we're likely to hold a referendum.
What do you say to taxpayers who are going to be forking out somewhere between $9 and $30 million?
Well, I think it's a complete and utter waste of money because, if it's just about sending a message, and that you can make that case when you had things like the Norm Withers referendum on tougher sentencing. That did send a message to Parliament, but this is something that we fully campaigned on, and the Greens aren't being terribly consistent. I remember when the referendum was proposed for smacking, the Greens, who essentially had driven that issue through Sue Bradford, said that that referendum should be ignored.
Will you ignore the result regardless?
Well, arguably, depending on when it's held, it might be a bit late anyway, because we're going through that process of having the mixed ownership model program rolled out. I think it'll be fairly politically driven anyway. The turnout's likely to be relatively low, and those that vote are more likely to be those who are opposed. And so, in my view, I'm not sure it's fully representative. If it was the number one issue, and if it was the thing that people felt on balance was really bad, then I don't think National would have received the sort of support it did in the last election.
Are you saying that the asset sales will be completed before the referendum?
Well, it's possible.
Is it likely to consider halting the Meridian Energy float until the referendum is held?
No. As I said, we had the general election and we won with an overwhelming majority.
What sort of cost are we looking at?
Well, it's between $9 and $30 million for the referendum, but almost certainly would be a postal referendum. Can't see how we'd hold it any other way, and that's about $9 million.
Is there an option to do measures with the local government election?
Not practically, no. I don't think so.
Is it likely to be before the end of the year?
I can't be sure of that. We're just going to get a little bit of advice. There's a number of things happening at the moment. You've obviously got the by-election in Christchurch East, I think it is. You've obviously got the local government elections. So we've just asked the Electoral Commission now to provide us some advice on timings that sort of would suit them.
Just on the living wage pledges that the two of the Labour Party leaders are contenders to make, what do you make of those two different pledges for a living wage? Is there room for a living wage in New Zealand?
Well, they clearly have no understanding of economics. So we've just asked for a back-of-the-envelope costing of $18.40 per hour as the minimum wage. And the indications we have had is that would cost $2.5 billion for that particular policy. up to potentially $4 billion if you believe NZIER, the economic consultants who have given an indication of what it would cost, and it likely cost 26,000 jobs. So it sounds great in principle until you put 26,000 people on the dole queue and cost the economy somewhere around about $2.5 billion.
You're saying it's only going to cost $20 to $30 million for core state servants. That's all they're promising at the moment. So why are you applying it right out?
Yeah, so for a start off, I'm pretty sceptical on the 20 to 30 million for a start, because when we looked at the minimum wage going to $15 an hour for just Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, MSD and ACC, that alone costs 68 million per year. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if they are saying that a living wage is $18.40 an hour, why should someone get $18.40 an hour because they work for the government, but not if they're a food worker in some other part of the private sector, not if they're a cleaner who works for some private sector company, of which it's the vast overwhelming bulk. And I think they're actually being pretty disingenuous with the truth. When they look down the barrel of the camera and they say, you should get $18.40 an hour, they're wanting people to hear, every person that earns under that, to hear that message. They're not really saying, you who work for the government, paid in this very small subset. So, look, if it was as simple as legislating for higher wages, why wouldn't we legislate for $30 an hour? Why wouldn't we double the wages of every single New Zealander? There is no country I can think of in the world that has legislated its way to prosperity. We have to earn our way to prosperity, and none of these candidates are talking about that. They are talking about a move to the far left. They certainly are talking about writing policies they can't afford to fund, and they're certainly being quite fast and loose with the reality of what these things would cost. Because when they go out and tell people it's 20 to 30 million and the bill's $2.5 billion, I think it just screams why we in the national government believe that Labor can't be trusted with the
There's
checkbook.
there's been a lot of discussion obviously about the left-wing economic models and all these sort of things being talked about. Is trickle-down economics working for New Zealanders?
Well, when you think about the fact that we're going to be back in surplus by 2014-15, we have an unemployment rate that's generally been falling. We've got rising house prices across the country. We've got good economic stats in many particular areas. Overall, I think we're doing okay. So is it perfect? No. But we have a redistribution system through Working for Families, heavily orientated towards low to middle income workers. So yes, New Zealand needs to lift its wages, but if we're going to do that in a way which just isn't inflationary, it doesn't put people on the dole queue, we need to make our economy far more competitive. And every time we talk about making it competitive, the Labor Party oppose those measures. So they're saying they support small businesses, but the very thing they're going to do is abolish a 90-day probationary period, and they are going to put huge pressure on the wage bills of those very small businesses that hire 2 or 3 people. They're opposed to us opening up the oil and gas and mineral and exploration sector in New Zealand, but they criticise the government when people leave for Australia to go and work in the mining sector. They're opposed to things like more infrastructure in the form of roading and transmission gully. They're opposed to the rollout of ultra-fast broadband. So, they have a very confusing message. They want to nationalise supermarkets, from what I can see, right through to sort of the housing market. And on the other side of the coin, they want to do anything that's pro-growth.
Doesn't what you were saying about targeting minimum wage workers, not necessarily government workers, are you suggesting that not many people within the core public service would be affected by living wage?
Well, the core public service is generally paid a bit better anyway, but I'd be very surprised if it's 20 to 30 million, simply because if you look at that sort of ACC, MSD, all of those kind of arguments, that was 68 million a year just to go to $15 an hour, not $18.40 an hour. But what I'm saying is, if the argument is about workers need more money, then it's all workers that are not well paid, not workers that happen to be paid by the taxpayer. And if you want to do that, then that's $2.5 to $4 billion. It's 26,000 people losing their job. And that's why those kinds of policies don't work. And yep, we need to get people's wages up. I fully accept that. And I fully accept there's some people that really struggle. And that's why in the worst of times, we've supported not only Working for Families, but taken some quite tough steps, I think, to keep interest rates low and to keep the economy going. But if anybody thinks we could just through the click of our hands, double wages with no impact or substantially increase wages with no impact, then we would do that tomorrow, because that would be a very popular thing to do, but it's not real. And the people who believe that we can do that with no implications for the economy also believe the Easter Bunny is going to turn up next year, and he won't.
So what do you say then to someone like the warehouse who have adopted this living wage for their staff?
Yeah, well, they're free to go and do that if they want to, and that's absolutely supported. We don't encourage people to pay the minimum wage. We set a minimum wage as the minimum that we think that someone should earn. If a company can afford to pay more, lots of companies have bonus schemes, lots of companies have extended superannuation schemes, lots of companies provide a lot of alternative benefits for their workers, and we absolutely fully encourage that. But if blanket across the board, we're going to force that on the economy, it comes with a very big price tag.
They keep referring to the cleaners that work in your office. Do you not think that those people deserve, the little more than the minimum wage that they are getting?
Yes, but they're also the cleaners that work in their office as well, and they were the same cleaners that were probably there for 9 years when they were in government. And the reality is that we provide that support as best we can through things like Working for Families. So again, if you go back to somebody who earns $13.75 an hour and they work that for 40 hours a week, that's roughly $29,000 a year. If they are supporting 3 children, as may often be the case, then on that system, they earn $29,000 approximately, they lose $4,000 in tax and get $23,000 back through the accommodation supplement and Working for Families. New Zealand's minimum wage is 50% of the average wage, and that's the highest in the OECD.
Do you think, though, that Working for Families and these accommodation supplements are effectively subsidising low wages?
Yes, they're a government-funded subsidy for lower wages, I accept that fully, but in effect, if we don't do that, then essentially what will happen, either some of those jobs will disappear, and some of those companies will disappear, and it will force outsourcing to certain areas.
How much of a breakthrough is a different subject?
Nearly got out the door.
How much of a breakthrough is the letter that 37 American farm lobby groups have sent the Secretary of Agriculture there, saying they want no exclusions, they support TPP and they want no exclusions, including agriculture?
I think it's a really positive sign, and I think it shows what we've been thinking for quite some time, that the American dairy industry and beef industry will do very well out of TPP, because their neighbouring NAFTA partners, particularly Canada, are highly subsidised at the moment, and that'll open up a bigger market for them.
So how much does it increase the chances of TPP being signed this year?
It helps. As a thing I've been saying recently, the feedback we've been certainly getting from Mike Froman and from President Obama himself is that they are, and the US administration is fully committed to TPP, and they want to see it completed as quickly as possible.
And we'd like to do, what would we like to give back? I mean, this could farming pay the price for it?
We're not going to sign up to anything that isn't in New Zealand's best interest. So there's always give and take in these things, and we have to think about the overall economic implications for the economy. So some of the modelling we've seen indicates a benefit of anywhere between $2 and $4 billion to the New Zealand economy. So if we had to give a little bit to get that, and the government picked up the bill for that, we might consider that to be worthwhile, because everybody has to give and take a bit. But there will be no wholesale dismantling of farming. We've already ruled that out.
And do you understand why the Americans have changed that?
I haven't actually seen specifically their rationale, but for quite some time Tim Gross has been telling me, in his view, the implications for the US agricultural sector are very positive as a result of TPP, not negative. Okay, we can run for the door.